Welcome everybody to another episode of Transformers, which is our Tessiant podcast. This week we're joined by Claire Hennah. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
I'm Matt Neal. I'm one of the managing partners at Tessiant. I'm also joined by my co-host, Jen.
I'm one of the principal consultants at Tessiant, and we're looking forward to this conversation today.
Thanks very much, Jen and Matt. I'm Claire, and just way of introduction, from a career perspective, I've worked in 4 kind of core industries: media and publishing, travel, luxury retail, and most recently FMCG. And now I'm going out doing my own thing, so a whole new world, and we're talking about transformation today. So that's not only happening from a career perspective, but equally personally right now in the next stage of my journey. So thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. Welcome.
Brilliant.
My background's a real mix of industries. So I started my career in publishing, then moved into travel, then moved into luxury retail, and then most recently FMCG. And I've had a couple of board roles as well in between. And now I'm working with brands and companies on their next stage of growth. And so I'm working mainly in a private equity VC type of space in the beauty and wellbeing area in particular, but also working in a couple of different industries. So yeah, as I said, super excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. Well, welcome to the show and welcome to entrepreneurship as well. It's a great journey. I'm a big recommender of that kind of thing. I think what we wanted to talk about today, I think what's really interesting, sort of looking through your career, is you've been in an industry which has been through such transformation in the last few years that I was really interested to sort of get your take on that, really, and sort of how it changed, how you changed it. Those sorts of questions is what I kind of really wanted to get into. But I think it all starts with how you got there, which is the early career is really interesting, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and when I'm reflective of my career, and other people I've spoken to have said, most people tend to do things the other way to how you've actually done it, and startups into kind of big scale up and corporate organisations. A lot of people have kind of flipped that. So maybe a little bit more unique in that perspective. So when I came out of university, I really wanted to get into advertising. And I was finding it a bit hard to penetrate the ad agencies. And then I got approached about this fantastic startup called handbag.com that essentially was an online women's magazine. And it predated Facebook. And yes, I am that old. And they basically said to me, do you fancy joining, managing advertising around the website? So it essentially worked like a normal magazine where you sold advertising around the editorial, but everything was purely digital. And it was a women's magazine. So it had relationships, fashion, beauty. So I absolutely loved it. And so it was such a great platform to start my career. I think I was employee number 20, something like that. And so going into a startup was just such a great way to build the foundations of my career. I worked with great people, and everybody was incredibly motivated to be there to make the business a success. And so after a couple of years working alongside the sales team and managing the advertising side, I then moved into marketing, and the business started to expand. We launched a teen title. And so it was really in my element, really. And I did a bit of everything when we launched the teen title, from guerrilla marketing to running a Clothes Show Live stand when Clothes Show Live used to exist. And again, I think I'm showing my age. And so it really got my passion for marketing way back when. And even though I worked in a digital entity, we did the full 360 approach from a marketing perspective because we were building awareness. And ironically, I was also then working with a couple of FMCG brands, and that's when I first sparked my awareness and knowledge of FMCG. So after kind of different guises, different ownership structures, I was at that business nearly 6 years, and I got the opportunity to then work with brands like Harper's Bazaar, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, and be part of a digital team that was integrating the capabilities, the websites, and the people really into Hearst, which was the national magazine company in the UK. And so that was kind of a 6-year journey. Then I went and consulted for a year or so, and then I joined Virgin Atlantic and ran a startup for them called vtravel.com, which best way to describe it is a blend of Booking.com and TripAdvisor. And we did a big reset on the business case, aligned it to the loyalty program, added in a gamification approach where you could, when you left a review, you could earn miles for your content contributions. So it was actually really pioneering way back when. It didn't quite meet the heights that we were expecting. And I guess you could probably say it's one of those failed startups that you learn a lot from. But it was a hugely pioneering moment to be part of Virgin Atlantic and the culture that they were really creating, and very entrepreneurial. I remember traveling 2 hours there and 2 hours back. But when you arrived, you had a Richard Branson statement saying, "Screw it, let's do it." And you're like, yeah, okay, all right. And so that was a real kind of, moment. So, and then after a couple of years of doing that, I joined Selfridges. And I'd shopped at Selfridges as a child, a teenager. So it was definitely like a going home moment. And yeah, I mean, again, a moment in time of transformation, really. I guess Selfridges, beautiful experiential retailer, over 100 years old, and this digital thing was just really annoying and just creating a bit of pain for the teams, for the company, for the consumer. And I joined the digital team to kind of lead the next stage of growth, transform, put all the kind of key fundamentals in, from assisted selling to launching international. And again, it was a real moment in time. I came back from maternity leave, ran a transformation program all around single view of the customer, implemented Salesforce. So kind of a lot of those kind of key building blocks that you expect in omni-channel businesses, and then joined Unilever.
That's really interesting about Selfridges, because you think there's the home of retail theatre, aren't they? So you think they'd take to the kind of online world, but they were...
No, well, I mean, it's not that they didn't take to it. I think it's more that luxury at that time, you had the early pioneers of a kind of Net-a-Porter really kind of flying the flag for luxury, but luxury brands themselves still needed a lot of convincing to retail online. They were not in a stage where, I guess, in a case of limited distribution, trying to protect your brand and not making it available to everybody, and the luxury cues and the experience. And you talked about retail entertainment, which Selfridges is so well known for doing. How do you create that magic in a digital environment? So I actually really understood the resistance. But then if you go back to purely from a consumer perspective, consumers want choice, and they can't really understand and rationalize, well, if that Louboutin shoe is available in that boutique, what do you mean I can't see it on the website? I might not buy it on the website, but I want to see how high it is. I want to see some of the kind of je ne sais quoi of the details, right? And I just think they needed time to be able to understand, people were quite happy to drop £10,000 on a Cartier necklace, that they actually wanted to experience their product in a digital environment, particularly as mobile usage was going up, right? So I just think it was moments in time. And so actually in these really early stages, I spent a lot of time with brands, our merchandisers and buyers, convincing brands to retail online. And one of those particular brands was Cartier, kind of a year in the making, really, of spending a lot of time in Paris, and there's worse places to spend your time.
Yeah, of course.
And, and once we were able to convince a few of the brands, the rest followed, really. And again, I think it's one of those kind of key fundamentals of building blocks. It was about choice, it was about consumers, it was about channels. So growing internationally was the next logical stage. I guess, the C's that you think about in kind of multi-channel businesses. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And it still is, for me, the best department store in the world. I am biased, of course.
I completely agree with you. Despite, Boohoo rebranding to Debenhams today,
I think that's exactly what I read on the way here. It's funny, I think all consumers have got different connotations. So if you were talking to a relatively younger person, not talking about ages and they're alongside us, maybe Boohoo might be there, and Debenhams kind of feels like a bit of yesteryears, doesn't it? I think I think about certain things because I've lived and breathed Debenhams as a consumer from relatively younger in age to what I am now, and it feels in my head a bit dated. So it's an interesting move. But hey, rebranding.
My first job, Debenhams. So,
really? There you go.
Perfume counter.
Perfume counter.
There you go.
Yeah. I know an interesting fact actually about perfume counters, right? So Harry Gordon Selfridge, way back when, and because I don't know how much you know, but perfumes were first created really to get rid of dirty smells. And he actually was one of the founding principles for him of putting beauty halls and fragrance counters at the front of the store, so it then wafted out to those smelly Victorian streets and it would entice consumers to come in. And that kind of beauty theatre and fragrance in particular was a way of creating stickiness. So there's an interesting fact talking about fragrance counters and how important they are for driving footfall.
That's really stuck as well when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. It's a retail format now.
Exactly.
But you tend to find it at the front of most department stores.
All of the bigger ones, the bigger older department stores, I think. So it's funny, Matt says his first job was at Debenhams. Mine was at Boots, and I remember handbag.com branding.
Yeah, because
handbags at the front.
Booshy's own
I remember it.
It used to be an internet service provider.
Yeah.
There you go as
You
well.
used to be able to get codes and stuff to put into.
Yeah.
I do remember it.
Yeah,
so.
there you go.
Yeah,
Bit of nostalgia
funny.
for you.
Yeah.
So I guess the startup initial career that gives you a great breadth of experience right in a short period of time, and then you're going through Selfridges at a time when they're going through a lot of change, transformation, seeing that. So what was the mandate at Unilever? Why did they sort of ring you up and say, do you want to come and join us? What were they looking for?
External talent, different perspective. And Unilever has a wonderful breed of people that have been in the business, and it's just such an education. I would call it like a university or school, because you learn so much. And in the digital space, they just needed some different people that hadn't grown up with, some of the areas whether they had already had the skill in the business. And I guess I was a bit of an interesting background, because I ended up joining the beauty and personal care division, and with my background at Selfridges and the premiumisation of the portfolio, actually there was quite a good category fit with my experience as well. And the online side of the business was tiny when I joined. I think it was like 3%. And then COVID happened, and then it's like, 20% of the business now. So it was a real transformation.
97% of sales from Unilever are through stores, right? So then the marketing is reflective of that. The channel is all geared for shipping product to store and then selling it. And so are they, when you join at that point, are Unilever aware that there's a change coming? Are you telling them there's a change coming? What's the thinking?
Actually, I think it takes bold leadership to see where the cusps of change will come from. And so, certainly when I joined the business, they were already calling it out as a strategic channel, and it was already important, but it was small. And I think that's reflecting on they needed new talent, they needed new ways of working. And actually, you could almost be the startup within the big corporate because you were small. And it just meant, though, when you get to a certain size, and generally in my experience, when you get to 10% of sales, that's when you start to really break business processes, standard ways of working. And so that's when you need to start pushing for more integration. And you can also be more demanding within that. So, I think, really, and particularly when you looked at the beauty and personal space, specialist retail and specialist beauty retail and online define a lot of where the business shifts are going, wherever you are in the world. And you only have to look at a market like India and you see online penetration increasing, you see retailers like a Nike starting building that kind of beauty prowess. And so you do see the fundamental shifts in beauty and wellbeing happening in specialist retail and beauty. So Unilever also had to make some moves there. And I think when you look competitively, a L'Oreal, Procter, they'd already invested ahead of the curve. So, coming for a little bit from behind, also they're making incremental investments. And so I do think, certainly, I worked with Alan when he was leading beauty and personal care at the time before he became CEO. He was already making big investments. He invested early in China when he led that market. So he understood the importance. It was just all about maturity, coming to markets, and depending what division you ultimately worked in. So, yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was challenging and it was so different working from retail, moving into FMCG. And And also just going into such a big multinational. I'd never worked anywhere as big as that as well. So it was different. And the pace was also really different because retail's all consuming. And particularly when you add in digital, every second of the day, you're knowing what the sales numbers are. And when you then work through retailers, and you kind of, alluded to it, but, when your business is then reliant on wholesale and retailers, well, they don't give you the data and you're very reliant on that. So you kind of need to think about the key building blocks, the infrastructure, the teams, navigating the business change that you need to go through. And as I said, I was super lucky, actually. Everyone I worked with was very open, intrigued by my background. And so, when I was working with teams in China, they're like, oh, well, you've got luxury experience and we're trying to premiumize our portfolio. So really open and receptive. And I think people probably might think, older company, more resistance. And that's the opposite, actually, to what I found.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because you think of Unilever as it's a mainstay of the of company, isn't it? It's hundreds of years old, and you'd imagine it would be a slow tanker to turn, but you found them very, very willing and very open to it.
I think, again, I would probably go back to category market maturities, right? When you make certain acquisitions, in certain prestige brands, in beauty, like a Dermalogica, you've already got a high exposure to online. And so naturally, you can kind of build momentum and capability. If you're working with a market like China, the market is naturally more digitally orientated, 30-40% of the business coming through those channels. And then you can start to see how that then plays out in other markets. And then, of course, COVID happened, right? And, really 10 years of growth happening in a couple of months. And I think for all of FMCG, that was a massive wake-up call, a massive turning point. And of course, you've seen a rewriting. People want physical shopping. You will never hear me say that physical shopping is not important. I actually don't care where the sale happens. I think it's about creating the best consumer experience that you can across channels. But of course, in a business the size of a Unilever, it is going to take time. It is going to take time. But you need to then think about structurally what you do in the beginning to then create the right building blocks that then allow you to then make the transformations as you go. And what are the proof points? What's the change that you need to drive? Who do you penetrate within the organisation? And when COVID happened, I think a key thing that happened is we launched a capability program. We worked with a partner called eConsultancy, and that was a massive digital upskilling program. And in 6 months, we'd reached 25% of the office population. And again, we had the support of the leadership doing that and actually creating a gamification model and, healthy competition and FOMO and all those good things that happens in change. So I think there are moments in time, and a business then starts to see shifts in the industry, the consumer, and sometimes you might be playing catch up, and sometimes you might have competitive advantage and lead in certain areas. And I think that's the opportunity, and that's why it was so fascinating, because it's many different business models, from direct to consumer to social commerce now, or in ice cream, fast delivery or quick commerce is really important. So really fascinating, because it's not one dimensional as well. And when I was at Selfridges, it's direct to consumer, right? Yeah. So I also learned many different business models, and it's also really hard in mass consumer goods to make the unit economics work. So there are also challenges that you perhaps don't think about in a luxury business when your average order value is £250, right? You don't have to think about those same dimensions, but selling a £2 bar of soap makes it equally a bit different. So as I said, moments in time, but classic change journey, and all about putting the right foundations. And something I took from Virgin is brilliant foundations, magic touches. And until you've got the foundations, it sounds boring, but until you've got the foundations right, the magic and the transformation won't happen.
So what were the foundations you looked to sort of put in place there then at Unilever?
Yeah, so when I joined, I'd already had a good team. But I think, the foundations was bringing in the right talent. I would also say creating a framework that people could really buy into. And one of the key thrusts was all around designing for channel, talking about portfolio, talking about the demand levers, and then the critical enablers. So in portfolio, we talked a lot about pack price architecture, so making sure that you had differentiation across your portfolio, that you weren't selling exactly the same of what you were selling in Boots as you were selling on Amazon, so making sure the foundations of how you retail online, starting with your product, because consumers are buying product, that it's fundamentally right to be able to shift it and sell it in a digital environment. Because, those pesky delivery drivers, they have a habit of just chucking your delivery over your garden fence, right? And it's breaking. And of course, if you're only designing for a shelf,
Yeah, of course.
you don't think about some of the dynamics like a leaky cap or a pump and what that does. So you have to go back to the foundations, and ultimately it's about consumers. What are their needs? And also, in a world where the physical shelf is quite restricted, you often find in an online environment people are looking for more niche needs, and that's why you see a lot of the insurgent brands popping up, because they're able to cater for them, and the route to market is easier than ever it was. So I think you need to think about consumer trends, needs, the pack price architecture, making sure it's differentiated so you're not ending up with lots of channel conflict and competition, because retailers also really squeeze you for margin, and why are you selling this here and why am I not getting this? So there's so many different dynamics. So I think that portfolio quadrant is so important. And then you've got your demand enablers from content. And I would say that was probably in the early stages really, really important. So how do you get brand managers thinking about creating content for the mobile phone? And we struggled actually, because it's one of many different things. To your point earlier, Matt, if you're thinking about what's your POS for Sainsbury's or Tesco, you're not necessarily thinking about a tiny screen on a mobile phone and what your brand looks like on that device. Not way back when. Now it's a bit different.
But that's where your sales starts often, right?
Yeah,
So,
often it does. So, but you then need to think about what are the foundational components. So content, making sure that your brand is seen. So things like search were really important. So these kind of critical demand enablers were a real focus. And as a marketing-led organisation, they captivated the marketeers. Portfolios harder, longer to change, but those kind of key demand enablers. And then, of course, fast forward to now, retail media. Every single retailer is trying to create their own retail media network. They're trying to squeeze again, suppliers. Make sure you spend with us, you advertise us, otherwise your brand won't be found. And we're in a different era again. But so media, content, really important. And then you've got your critical enablers, supply chain. So big box pallet type retailers don't serve the small very well, right? And if you've got a marketplace model, quick commerce, social commerce, you need a backbone infrastructure that works. And so you need to invest in your CapEx capability. So in a manufacturing plant in beautiful Port Sunlight in Liverpool, there is a part of the plant that actually has ISTA 6 testing. And ISTA 6 testing is a requirement for packaging at Amazon, where essentially it's a robot which drops the packaging and sees whether it withstands the route to market and doesn't break. But those types of fundamental capabilities are really important to make sure that you're serving consumers well. But they're investments. So they are critical enablers and backbone infrastructure, data and technology. And, so I set up a really early on conception of data and analytics team. I then integrated it into the broader data and analytics team before I left. But, it enabled us to kind of invest early, whether it was machine learning, whether it was, in AI way back when. I know everyone's talking about AI. You're probably thinking, when's the first part of the conversation we're going to be talking about AI?
We'll get to it.
But equally, I think it was about those early investments. And then the last thing I would probably say is knowing the differentiation by business model. So understanding the recipe to win for direct to consumer through to multi-channel through to social commerce is different, but always thinking about this cornerstone framework of portfolio, demand levers and then these critical enablers, team, supply chain, etc., were just important. So design for channel became the mantra, and it was conceptually easy enough for our organisation at that time to understand. And I found that in previous careers, right? You know, when I led a transformation of CRM at Selfridges, it was around the 3 R's. How do you remember people? How do you recognise people? And only when you do those 2 dimensions do you reward people. And I think sometimes, you know, that type of framework just helps keep it simple in organisations, particularly when you're driving transformation. It's important, simplicity of narrative.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you're contextualising it within the framework of how that business understands things, I guess, in the way you've just described the differences between sort of Selfridges and Unilever.
Yeah.
Is that a key?
Yeah, it is. I think ultimately, you know, there's an industry dynamic. Things can shift and lift, of course, but there's an industry dynamic. There will always be different challenges depending on your business, your maturity, the talent, you know, all of these different things, because that's the industries that you're working in. But I think, you know, the things that you learn in transformation is the simplicity of the narrative helps galvanize the organization behind something that they can understand because it's related to what they're going through, it's related to the consumer, and you don't make it too complicated. And I think in any kind of digital transformation, sometimes you can be your own worst enemy and you just bamboozle people with language that people don't understand and it scares people, right? And I think there's no need for that because actually you can make it, if you're explaining it to your gran, you can make it quite simple. So I just think it comes back to just an enabler or a framework that helps people understand what they need to do and what they're responsible for when driving for that change.
Yeah. And you briefly mentioned about how important the team was. What things do you think that you've taken from early on in your career that you've actually been able to utilise through each of the other stages from, you know, like the early smaller startups right through to Unilever? Were there specific things that you utilised within your team to kind of bring them on the journey with you when it's specific to change?
Yeah, well, I think you need to hire for the right skills, and that is just important, right? If you've got a skill gap, you need to fill it. Sometimes you can train people up, but sometimes you just need to get some experts in. So surround yourself with the right team. Also, think about the complementary nature of the team, right? When you're building a culture, and often in transformation periods or kind of startups or, you know, as I said, maybe being a little bit more pirate in the kind of Unilever context, it's a spirit, it's a culture, it's you're there driving, and your mentality is a little bit different than the rest of the organization because you're driving a horizon 2, horizon 3 that you can't potentially feel and see right now, but you know that you're building the legacy for the future. And so you can be, a bit more risk orientated. And I think that cultivates a different culture. So I think from that startup mentality that I had, maybe that's part of an essence that I've brought in with me. And so I don't worry so much about the risk, or I personally don't like the failing fast. I think it's more around what you learn and put those learnings into a great place. But it's acknowledging learning fast. I really actually love what Amazon used to call it, I don't know whether they still call it, but it's the correction of errors team. As in, you go in, you launch something, you find out what's wrong, and then you quickly diagnose it and you make some changes and you make some pivots. And I really love that kind of ethos because I think that's the dynamic environment, particularly that a kind of digital and now AI is driving for. You only learn by doing. So that spirit and culture, I think, is one. Hiring for the right skills, also compliments in those skills. And when you don't know stuff, hire the best people and surround yourself by great talent. You know, certainly in my last role, I didn't know everything about all the different retail constructs in Indonesia or India, but I surrounded myself with a great team that knew that, and we had completely complementary skills. I know where my blind spots are, and vice versa, right? So you're really transparent with what you can bring to the table, and what your team can. And in a way, I think that then creates a platform for people to feel that they can all shine. And they've all got a role to play and a part to play. And the last thing I would probably say is making sure as a leader that you unclip the wings for your team to enable them to go and deliver what they need to deliver. And particularly in transformation programs and driving for change, they will come up against resistance, they will come across blockers. And I think it's your job then to really help them unlock that and remove the barriers as best you can, so they can go and do and be the enablers, be the change agents that they need to be.
That's good leadership tip for sure. The whole sort of talking about sort of bringing a team in and the sort of startup ethos of a series of experiments, basically. How do you ensure that it's safe for them to fail in that environment?
You need to, like with anything new, you need to create some parameters around what success looks like. So you've got some proxies around, because it's new, right? So you don't actually know what success looks like. So you kind of need some milestones or some acknowledgements or some benchmarks that help you understand that, because otherwise you could just be trying and not really having that much of a material impact. So I think you need to understand some of those parameters of what you should be working in. You also need to reward it differently, right? And, there's many different examples now in many different industries of how you reward innovation cultures. But you do need to be quite purposeful if it's a test, if it's, and what would be the parameters of then scaling the proof of concept as well, particularly in big organizations, because working in one market, in one category, with one brand doesn't instantly mean it can be rolled out in every single category, every single brand, right? So you need to understand those parameters and milestones and proof points. I think that's always really important. In any business I've worked in, you just kind of need to show early success and proof that, you can create a bit of a wave. And also acknowledge killing it quickly if things are not working. And don't be ashamed of that either, right? Because that's as much as anything of kind of scaling, is it killing it, know when to kill stuff.
Yeah.
Because it takes so much resource and also a lot of energy. So taking people out of the equation, in terms of numbers of resource or money, etc., but also what it does to people when you're constantly trying to prove something to work, and actually then take the learnings from it and then build, what the next opportunity might be. And so that's why I say this kind of, opportunity to learn from it rather than your opportunity to fail from it. Because no human being in the planet it wakes up and says, I want to fail today. It's just not human nature.
Companies now that have failure managers and stuff like that who are there to ensure things fail so that they can learn from them. And I don't know where I stand on that.
No.
I still want people to go out and...
It's a funny word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Failure. Being and so I think it's got negative connotations.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in kind of creating the positive piece and certainly not looking at this half full. But I think it's important that the constant learning curve that you go through from someone who's doing a course at the minute, and I was thinking, why have I done this at the same time? I've also started to go out on my own and all of those things, but constant thirst of learning. Like last year I learned to be a Pilates teacher, which has got nothing to do with my working environment, but I really, really wanted to do that because I love Pilates, right? And I wanted to do it for a personal purpose to teach children. So I think it's more around the learning curve, the curiosity, the learnings that you can take to be able to just chart whatever comes next. And particularly in international organisations, the great learnings that you've got across the globe, you've got opportunities to create real lighthouses, and where that learning comes from can often be from a very small market, not necessarily a really big market, and it could be this brand, it could be this business model, And so the opportunity to share that holistically across other markets, you can also see a really good spirit of people feeling really proud. Okay, didn't quite work, but this is what I learned from it. So I would frame it differently, and I've always framed it differently. I personally prefer that. But, we keep on hearing this fail fast piece. But, and each to their own. I personally like reframing it.
That's definitely how I view it. I'm more of a positive slant on things kind of person.
Yeah.
I read a really interesting thing on, I can't remember where it was the other day, which was an article about flogging a dead horse theory, basically. And there's a list of things you can do with a dead horse rather than actually get rid of it, which they change the jockey. There's this big list of stuff. I found it really change the jockey, work out why send a team of medics in to diagnose what's wrong with the horse, run sort of
what
this big
are the
list
other
of things
to do rather than fail,
just
which
say
is
this isn't working.
Well, and that's it. I mean, it's a diagnostic, isn't it? And so you're diagnosing the issue and then probably making some other tweaks along the way, but then when it is really dead, you just then need to accept it, right? And that's when people maybe...
The amount of energy spent on
that's a lot of
things
energy.
that they could do with a dead horse rather than just saying this horse is dead.
Yeah. Oh, I like that analogy.
I guess as well, it's the confidence in knowing when to stop. Because obviously with a lot of things, there's so many people involved or there are so many different factors involved. You have to think about all of the factors before you go, no, actually, we have finished. We do need to kind of like bin this and start something new because we're not going to gain anything from it. I guess that's one of the things that you probably would have had to take from the startup side of things because you don't have the resource or the time or the money that you can put into things. So I guess those are the kind of things that would have been super key that you can carry forward.
I think it's also your level of accountability and responsibility. When I first started my career, having £10,000 to spend on Google AdWords for a month and, versus the millions that have come in latter parts of my career, I felt really, really responsible, really, really accountable for making that work. And I treated it like it was my own money. And I think that's potentially where people do go a bit wrong. They can maybe think that resources are plentiful. And in a scarcity-led world, and what you see, look, there's going to be a lack of water in the world. Maybe if we were just a bit more aware of what's ahead of us, we would make different choices and we would be more accountable for what we do. And I think that's potentially a watch out for teams, for companies in a scarcity-led world. Are we making the right choices in resources? And I reflect that really in my own leadership journey, but I think that's definitely helped being in the entrepreneurial environment where I started my career. And then particularly, when I think about now in where my time is limited, all the things that I thought I could do when I first started, I'm going to launch my own website, I'm really techie, and I was just like, okay, actually all this other content that I've got to deliver, from due diligence to this project here to I'm not going to build my own website. I'm actually going to outsource that to somebody that builds websites, So because I'm not superhuman and I'm not going to take on the whole world. And I think sometimes, when you look at your resources, what you have, you need to make certain choices around what you've got and where you need some help as well. And I think that kind of resource choice and, scarcity mentality and what you do and can add the right value versus actually how do you look at your squad of helpers to be able to make the things that you need to make happen.
And time's the ultimate scarce resource, right? So that's...
Time's always the enemy, right? But it's also precious, right? So what you do with your time, how you live, your work to your personal life are choices that we all make and we all learn from it. But we have to be choiceful with it.
And I guess now with kind of the tech environment, if you're talking about your website, obviously the way that we market things has changed so much. I guess like we were talking about handbag.com, there was the handbags in the stores. Obviously that wouldn't work now. So do you have kind of a way of thinking around the future of marketing? Obviously there's the gamification side of things, or there's TikTok, or there's social media specific in terms of Facebook or Instagram, or then you've got like the branded websites that can sell other products. Have you got like a specific strategy or route to market in terms of those types of things that you think is winning at the moment? Or is it kind of flood the market in loads of different areas, or is it focused?
Yeah, in my experience, I would probably say focus. But I think it really depends on the size and maturity you are of a brand, right? I think when you see smaller insurgent brands, what they have is innate focus because they can't be everything to everyone. They're very clear in their target or addressable audience. They're very clear on their segments. They're really clear on their format. They then might pick one channel or one retailer to grow in, and they're quite purposeful before they start going everywhere. And I think it's a well-served model, right? Because you can't be everything to everyone. And so you need to pick some lanes, right? And you need to then go really focused in those lanes. So if you are going into retail, that you really give it your focus and you think about your merchandising, you think about your point of sale, you think about how you're going to reach those consumers. If you are going to go to D2C, gosh, spend some time investing in how you're going to make the unit economics work. Do not start going into an unprofitable business model, right? Because it's really, really challenging. So you need to make your baseline unit economics work. And you need to think about the multifaceted model from product through to your cost of goods, supply chain. You need to think about that whole dimension. And, or if you're going to launch in multiple markets, is your home market strong? Does it give you the right creds to be able to then go and scale, or are you going to fragment and lose attention of winning on your home market? So there are definitely those. So I would say focus, because you can't win everywhere. And I think even for the biggest brands, when you're everything to everyone, that's when you can end up taking your eye off, and then there's suddenly an insurgent brand comes and takes your market share. So I would choose that over anything else. And I think the kind of what's happening to the shape of marketing is a big question, right? From what you invest in, your influencer side to, how is Gen AI going to change content creation? I just think the demands of a modern day marketeer are huge, them to be multifaceted, multi-skilled. And I think we still need to appreciate skills and, in creating amazing brands and creativity is to be acknowledged and respected, because only the human brain and creativity can come from probably, I still think, humans, and then you can let tech be able to take out some of the stuff and unnecessary stuff that's taking up human energy. Great, be more efficient, and then you've got periods of people that again respecting their discipline, PR, growth marketing. They're different disciplines, but I think this expectation that everybody can be multidisciplined is also something that needs to be challenged, I think, and we need to respect probably skill stacking, and that people have, unique and rare skills that they can bring to the table.
I've heard you talk previously about desirability from brands. What's the secret to success there, do you think? And how's that evolved over time?
I think to be desirable is, it's that kind of age-old saying of, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? And so the concept of desire is different to different people. But I think it's about stepping up in terms of cues, particularly if you just think about a beauty brand. So the packaging, the feel, the texture, the smell. There are cues that we think of when desirability comes into it, and luxury is obviously well founded in those cues, and so differentiation to create desirability is also a different important factor, because if you are mediocre, you don't really stand out from the crowd either. So, which is okay on certain categories and certain brands, right? But I think in certain industries, desirability is really important. So if you take travel as well, I've been particularly in a post-COVID world, if we can call it a post-COVID world now, because there'll be something else popping up. But, we've thought about the desirability of our time. We've thought about how we spend it, and we think about that kind of that moment on the beach or that moment on the ski slope or whatever it might be, they're being like their desired moments in our mind. And I don't want to overemphasize what brands can do, but I think, the concept of desire has probably changed, and we value it a bit more depending on the experience, the category, the brand, etc. So I think it comes back to cues, emotion, and thinking about, classic marketing across the P's, really. Place, if it's available everywhere, it's probably going to be less desirable. Product is, so what is it about the product? As I said, is it texture? Is it packaging? What are the cues? But I think desirability is definitely a key way of winning hearts and minds. So both yin and yang, I guess.
You talked before about purpose for brands. There's obviously that's been something which has changed within all business really over the last and consumer goods I think has been at the forefront of a lot of the headlines behind that. What's your take on how that's changed over the last few years?
I think it again goes back to the context of the brand, right? I don't think everything needs to be rooted in deep origins of purpose, but I think it probably needs clarity around what's the purpose of your product, what will you do for me as a consumer, and then you go into that broader scale of what is purposeful. Are you making some changes in the world? Are you creating good? And I think we've probably got a bit grey in what we define as purpose. And so I don't think every single brand needs a deep-rooted foundation purpose. I'm going to do XX for society, planet, etc. But I think you need to be clear around what is the purpose of your product and what you're going to do for a consumer. And then I think you need to think about the concept of what consumers are thinking about now is that they often do want to know what they're buying for is doing good for people and planet. But I think the tipping point has been that people have just probably gone a bit too far. Or brands, I would say, probably gone too far, gone out of their cornerstone or their wheelhouse of what gives them the right to talk about certain things and what it doesn't. And I think you've seen that, across the world with brands. So if it's rooted with clarity around what does your product do, how does it help me, and then how does it help society, the world, the planet, but look at it in those kind of different dimensions. And don't just shove something in for the sake of shoving something in. I think it has to have relevancy and it has to connect with consumers in the right way, because otherwise they just won't believe you.
Yeah. And do you think, in terms of what we were talking about purpose and desirability, have you seen that sustainability has become something that has been a lot more prominent to the consumers of different products, but the products that you've seen in the areas that you've worked?
Yeah, look, I think we could be talking about so many different things, from ED&I to sustainability, moments in time, right? And, the rewriting, rebalancing, and, where we've gone too far on the spectrum. But when you're talking about sustainability, I think you just need to be very conscious around what targets you're talking about, how tangible those targets are. I'm, in particular, with any business I'm working with, I hate seeing things like in 2050, we will be carbon neutral. Okay, most people that are working in this business are not going to be working here. And a consumer, conceptually, 2050, okay. Do I even know? Can I even dream what the world is like at that time? And it's so I just think we need things that are much more tangible, much more real. And they don't necessarily need to change the world right now, but they need to be rooted with where I can see change and feel change. And that's the mistake that I think many companies make. And that's going back to being really clear what you can do, in what time frame, and also being honest and transparent around what is happening when. And if you are not meeting something, gosh, make sure that you are also transparent about it. So, my current company I'm on board for, I lead the ESG from a board perspective. And, we've just been really important to show progress over perfection as well. And, and I think consumers really appreciate it. And it's a fine line now. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And you're not going to be able to please everybody. But I think erring on the transparency rather than being wishy-washy or very intangible targets doesn't help.
It sounds like you're rooting it in what's important to your customer rather than trying to take a stance on everything. And it makes sense that for a beauty company, a cosmetics company, a manufacturer with a big supply chain, then it's things like sustainability that are going to be potentially making a difference between a sale or not a sale for certain demographics.
Yeah, but I also think there's no one brand, no one company that can do it on their own, right? It does require such intrinsic partnerships from NGOs, governments, companies and consumers, right? So it's multifaceted, right? And it's not one thing that's going to save the world of the track that we're on. But obviously there are bigger companies, governments, etc., that can do huge amounts to be able to change the path of what we're on. But it is going back to consumers time and time again, like with most things, right? You will be irrelevant if you're not connected to what they want.
With the sort of, I guess the science both seems to change quite regularly, and also opinions on it change quite regularly. So I was listening to a podcast by a very famous entrepreneur who we all know and love the other day, and he had on someone who's a professor in toxicology, and she was talking about basically fragrance in things, and 90% of what's in your cupboards is killing you. Basically, was this headline on it, and I was thinking, oh my god, it's like, and so if you're Unilever, have you got sort of teams of people monitoring this stuff and going, is this true? Is this real? Is this important?
Oh, yeah, no, it's super important. I think it depends on any size of company. You're going to be open to risk and regulation in a way that perhaps a small insurgent brand isn't. I was talking to someone in private equity yesterday, and, they're talking about, a particular brand and founders that really push their claims, but any strategic looking at buying them would be very concerned about that and regulation, etc. So every big company has to have the right protocols, risk component, regulations, because they're much more open to, people coming for them, and they've got a duty of care. And I think that duty of care, when I worked at Virgin, the duty of care was getting somebody from A to B safely, right? And that's the number one thing.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there's the experience, but the number one thing, and everyone in the airline knew that. And so I think it's just about making sure that you do, any big company would be much more open to it. But even if you're a small brand, and I do favour on pushing the claims, because I do think you can talk about stuff in a way that people understand, but do it in a legal way, the right way. And yes, the science changes all the time, but now when you see the trend of longevity and people wanting to live happier, longer, better lives, what I put in my body, what I put on my body, that's only starting to come more as science and biohacking, what you're hearing about, all these things. That the science is changing rapidly. So what we're talking about right now, in a year's time, we'll probably be having a different conversation, right? Because, our advancements are, materially, with these wonderful scientists that we have all over the world developing that. So I think it's about also, you have to stay very close to that, because to your point, it does change. And then what consumers' understandings change. That access to information now, in an advent world of social media, you're much more informed as a consumer. So you have to be on your A game as a company or a brand, because and that's regardless of your size.
Yeah.
Well, wait, it might not even be us having this conversation in a couple of years' time. It'll be our personal AIs.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Right? We can have some fun later creating what that might look like. But yeah.
I listened to something the other day. So I've got there's a kind of Telegram group that I'm interested in, that I'm part of, and they, rather than have summaries of it, they'd basically got a bot to create a podcast of the last 3 hours worth of conversation, where it's two hosts talking to each other, discussing what's going on in the podcast, and that in a podcast format. And the feature of that is then that you'll be able to dial into that and ask them questions about their understanding of it. So that's where we're at now, and it's just insane. Anyway, sorry, we're going down the AI road.
No, well, we're there, aren't we? Or, what's going to happen in 6 months' time? God, it's just it's exciting but scary at the same time, right?
Definitely.
Where do you see the future of AI, agentic commerce, whatever you want to?
Oh my goodness, Matt! If I had that, I wouldn't be probably sitting here. I'd be probably chilling out on a nice yacht, right, somewhere. Look, I think, we're in another transformative time. I think we're in an era of efficiency and effectiveness. Now starting to, when you now see people with, their ChatGPT out more mainstream, right? And, asking it basic, efficient questions, and you can see how it impacts what you do and, you're a bit sharper, takes less time. So the reality is people starting to use it, and you've got to fundamentally start there, because you'll always have the people that are very far advanced, the incubator type crowd where they're ahead of the times. But now you're getting to this kind of people are slowly starting to use it, see the effects on it. Do people have that allergic reaction talking to an AI bot, and they did 5 years ago? They have moments of maturity again of time. So I think we're in a kind of efficiency and effectiveness era at the minute, where people are starting to use it.
I think brands are starting to. So what I'm hearing is brands are starting to experiment with advertising on it, right? So Google and Meta, you can now influence the AI if you're a brand by paying for exposure on it, right? So if I'm, hey, whatever, I don't know what they're all called, but hey, Google's AI, I want to learn about shaving today. What can you tell me about how I should effectively shave? Well, first you should go and buy a Gillette razor, because they're the best a man can get. Like that kind of thing is what the answers you're going to, and how do you trust that?
But then I think you have to go back to, it's the same as search results, right? You pay to play, right? And, I think we're in an experimenting phase. We're training. Is in kind of a training time, and you are going to have that, right? And consumers will be wise enough as well. But like this morning, I went onto my business banking. Again, this new world, and I couldn't find my customer number. This particular number that I needed to link to my accountant, right? And I called the number, and they were like, oh, you do know now that you can use our AI bot. They were very transparent. Just go onto your app and ask the question, and you should be able to find what you're looking for. Otherwise, call back when we're less busy. And I was infuriated because I made a phone call. And I was like, okay, I'll just go onto the app and then I actually found it within 10 seconds, which is much more efficient for me and them, let's face it, and much more cost effective. But I just went to pick up the phone, right? Because that was a habit that I'd had, and sometimes you hit and miss with AI agents, right? But so I think it is about, we're just in this experiential moment of time. We're using it, we're learning. The AIs are learning a lot of different learning models, etc. So I think, we're going to go through natural stages, but fast stages, not in a way where we're talking about kind of the internet and the leaps that it went through. Everything's going to happen a lot faster. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago with some fantastic people, and there was one particular person who was in data and analytics, and he was talking about agentic AI. He was talking about that. I was just like, I just need you in my pocket. I think not ChatGPT. I just need you. And again, we go back to what we were talking about earlier about employing people with the right skills and the change curve that you're going to go through yourself, the organisation, and you powering up that next phase of transformation is going to be huge. But again, I think it's seeing the pocket. So, often now when you're seeing in businesses, they're tackling customer service first, because again, you can see that efficiency and effectiveness coming through, and then you start training, and then it will be, I used a lot, in my previous role around Gen AI and content creation, and then I could see asset, costs coming down, and then that changes the agency model. So fundamentally, your agency cost model. it's having big changes, whether that's your business model, your cost, your pricing, so it's just happening at such a fast pace. So the biggest thing that you can do now is effectively learn, play, and get up to speed and make it your learning agenda.
I think that the change that's coming is going to be huge. I'm really genuinely excited for what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be insane.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And also, when you look at your kids as well, gosh, what does this mean for their future, their skills? How do you guide them in the right way so their job doesn't get replaced, right? And so you've got this kind of other duty of care for this kind of very young population now coming through, of being like, what does this mean for their future? And what are the skills, the roles and stuff that we're going to need that are going to be naturally displaced? Yeah, so there's a kind of flip side as well. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, my little boy wants to be a dog walker, so I think he's okay.
Yeah.
It'll be a while before Optimus does that really well, isn't it? So,
yeah. It's super interesting. And I think it's interesting to see when you work with younger people now, not young people, but when you work with kind of like, I don't know, 18, I don't know which the Gen it is, but it's like the 18 to 21-year-olds, the difference that you see in how they work and how they use AI in some of the companies that we work within, working with those teams is really interesting, and it makes me feel like I can learn so much from them. So I'm like, oh, what were you writing in there and how did you word it and everything? So you can actually learn from people because they're learning so quickly. Actually, I feel like I'm learning really slowly now compared to them because it's happening so fast.
Totally. And that's why, it's always really great to navel gaze with younger people, right? Not even the ones that you work with, from nieces to nephew to kids, etc. Because how they use social media, how they communicate. I mean, I was recently on a ski trip with my nephew. I could not get hold of him on WhatsApp. But as soon as I sent him a message on Snapchat, of course I could get hold of him. So I think it's just like different communication patterns, different ways of working, different, ultimately there is a way. And so you only just need to watch to know that how things are changing. And if you just spent any time looking around you from the train to the shops, you see that, right? And it's up to you. And it's up to you to kind of get yourself all in to learn, right? And I think that's a responsibility we as older leaders need to take, and also spend some time hanging out with people who know what to do
exactly.
as well.
So spend more time watching them rather than trying to predict the future ourselves then.
Yes, that's what I think. That's how I'm going to get to that yacht, right? Spending more time hanging out with the youth.
Thanks very much for coming in. That's been absolutely brilliant, sharing all that with us. It's been really fascinating to learn more about you and your journey.
100%, yeah. Genuinely, there's so much in there.
Thank you.
Really, really, really interesting.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.